Whenever I see these wardrobes, I immediately think of Narnia. This one was at my local recycle center. It was $100, but I would not have passed this one up. It had some stunning details to it, some carvings, that beautiful oak grain. It had some of the original handles, not all, and it was missing something up top, but overall, this piece had some really beautiful bones. It just needed a refinish, so follow along if you want to see the process. Now, this flip did not start out easily. Not only did I forget the tarp when I went to pick it up, and Murphy's Law would have it rain on the way home, hence the dark marks that you can see on the front of the piece. When I did get it off the trailer, the cupboard locked itself. Now, I do have a set of skeleton keys for when this happens, or if I buy a piece that may have a lock that has a missing key, but these skeleton keys that I get from Bunnings did not work on this set, which was unfortunate. So I went ahead and just tried to break in. So I tried to remove this panel off the front. It wasn't budging. This was incredibly well made. All of these joins were dovetailed. It was nailed on. It was glued on. And I quickly abandoned before I damaged anything on the front here. As you can imagine, by this point, I was feeling pretty frustrated, but I went around to the back of the piece and I was able to remove 2 panels off the back. Yes, they did rip a little bit, but there wasn't too much damage. I got into the cabinet, just removed the screws from the lock and was able to remove it. Then it was just down to repairing the damage on the back. I glued both of the sections and then I nailed everything back into place and they went together pretty well. I then removed both of the handles that were on the drawer, and what you will find a lot of the time with this style of handle is that they're actually nailed on, and they can be tricky to remove because they look like they can be unscrewed, but they actually can't be unscrewed. I put the paint scraper behind, or you can use a butter knife to pry the handle up just that little bit, just enough so that you can get a hammer behind, and then you can easily remove the little nail. This set of handles actually came off a previous flip that I had done from a similar time period, but unfortunately all of the handles, including the one that came off the cupboard, were all electroplated. And electroplating is just a metal coating that is put onto the handle, but it wears off over time. So no amount of scrubbing is going to bring these back up to anything that looks decent, in my opinion. So I'm using etch primer here so that I can paint them. While that was drying, I moved on to cleaning everything down, and I'm using white spirits here. This is very similar to mineral turpentine. It's great for removing any oily residues or waxes that may be sitting on the surface. Once everything was completely dry, I moved on to sanding, and I'm using a 240 grit sanding pad here with my orbital sander, and this was sufficient to remove what was left of the finish. I used my orbital sander for majority of this, but in those little door inserts where you get the triangle where the orbital sander can't quite get in, I used my sheet sander. For this particular look, I really wanted to enhance that oak grain, and one of the ways that you can do this, which is really effective, especially on oak, is to grain the timber. So you can see I'm using a wire brush, and what that wire brush is actually doing is it's deepening the grain. So each wire bristle runs along the grain and it removes some of the soft timber. So it creates a little bit of texture, and depending on what finishing product you use, you can actually create a lot of contrast using this technique. On one section of the wardrobe, I did have a little bit of paint that had seeped deeper into these grain lines, so I'm using some acetone, which helps to soften that paint, and then I'm using that same wire brush to actually lift the paint out. Getting back to the handles, once that first coat of primer was dry, I did my first coat of this gold metallic spray paint. This one is by Accent, and it's more of a cool brass gold, if that makes sense. It's more in alignment with a vintage vibe. For this look, I really wanted to have that dark and moody, almost original feel to the timber, but I wanted to get that contrast in the grain. So I'm using FIDDES tinted hard wax oil in the color Onyx, and this is actually a tinted black hard wax oil. For my application, I'm using the non-abrasive side of a regular kitchen sponge, so the green side. I'm working in circular motions and I'm pushing the product into the grain where I deepened it before with that wire brush. As I finish each section though, I'm just skimming across the top, working back with the grain. Not only am I getting that beautiful contrast with the grain, I'm also achieving a toned down look. So I'm getting a light wash of color across the rest of the timber. FIDDES tinted hard wax oil comes in a range of colors and they're all intermixable. So depending on what look you are going for, you can create some really beautiful custom tones. It's also a fantastic option for furniture because it will last 8 to 12 years with proper upkeep and it's replenishable. So when it does come time time to reseal this wardrobe, all I have to do is reapply the hard wax oil back over the top. Once my handles were completely dry, I went straight over the top with some dark wax. I'm applying with a brush and then I'm dabbing the excess off. And what this does is helps to add a little bit of depth and shadowing to the little details, so they look more lived in as opposed to a flat brass painted look. After my first coat of the hard wax oil had dried, I actually went in with a second coat, but I did a 50-50 mix of the onyx tinted hard wax oil and the matte clear hard wax oil. I then got the handles back on and used some European gold rub and buff again, just on some high points, getting that lived in look. I used the same on the hinges, and inside where there were some hooks that had been added obviously by the previous owners, and there was this little coat spinner up the top, I used the rub and buff on those as well. On the very top of the wardrobe where we were missing something, I definitely wanted to add a piece of timber to sort of take away from the fact that something was missing. So I had this piece of timber that had come off a previous piece of furniture that I had flipped. It was oak. The color actually matched up, but when I put it up there, it was just too square, especially with the amount of detail that was actually on the piece, and the holes that were along the bottom where it had been attached to the other piece of furniture didn't look right either. So I had my woodworking wizard neighbor Richard come over, who is a member of the men's shed, and I gave him creative license to do something that just looked a little bit more ornate. You can see what I mean by the top here. It's just too square, too straight, but Richard absolutely nailed the brief. He went away and created a really beautiful, subtle pattern for the top here, and I think it made all of the difference. I gave the piece a coat of the hard wax oil just to match it up with the body of the piece, and then I nailed and glued it into place. Here's a quick reminder of where we started out on this one, and this is where we are now. It is absolutely glowing. There are so many incredible elements to this piece. I love the contrast of the grain, the depth and dimension that black wax has added, especially in the carved details. I love that it still has a rustic, lived-in vibe. Those little handles down the bottom really complement the carvings, but the bonnet up the top, I think, made this piece. It just finished it off and sort of brought everything together. As always, I would love to know what you think about this one, so jump in the comments, let me know if it's a nail or fail. Did I do this piece justice?